Let's talk about the new aerospace standard IA9100 and why it's big news, but not scary news. Alright, so I wanted to do a really quick news update here because this is some breaking news and it's pretty big. It's going to have a fairly big impact on the aerospace community, those of you who are certified to AS9100. And I want to clarify, this is big news, but it shouldn't be scary news. Okay, so we want to be thoughtful about this, but this is pretty big. So let's jump into it. And what am I talking about? Essentially what's happening is AS9100 is going to be rebranded as IA9100. And specifically, there have been multiple posts made, both officially and unofficially, saying that this is going to happen next year. So we are in 2023. This is going to be in 2024 that we're going to see a new standard come out, a new revision of AS9100, but it's going to be called IA9100. So this is why, obviously this is huge. This is a very, very big piece of news for anybody who's going to be certified to this, is going to have to adapt to the new standard. But the reason I'm saying it's not scary is because there's a lot of information we don't know. This may not be much more than rebranding. I think it will be, as I'm going to show you. There's going to be a little bit more than rebranding. We don't know the level of change that we'll see. And also, this deadline of happening next year is very unlikely to happen. It's probably nearly impossible. But let's break it down. So where's this information coming from? Well, it started with this guy. Over on LinkedIn, the consulting company called Simple Q posted a sort of self-congratulatory thing about their CEO, Jim Lee, being on the committee. And they accidentally, dropped this bombshell in the middle of this post on LinkedIn. This was yesterday, so this would have been April 21, 2023, where he says the AS9100, AS9110, and AS9120 standards are intended to be updated in 2024 and then released as IA9100, 9110, and 9120. So again, this was a self-promotion kind of thing. Is one of the reasons why you really don't want these consultants on these committees, is because they tend to, they use their role on the committee to promote themselves, and here's a great example of that. But in the middle of this, he dropped this bombshell, right? So I saw this come on, and I said, well, I haven't heard a thing about this. Why is that? Why don't I know about this? And so I started digging to see what do we know? And the reality is that there's very, very little information on this, very little. And so I collected as much as I could find while we wait for officials who I've contacted to chime in and tell us what exactly is going on. But barring that, which will probably happen next week or so, this is the information we have. We know that in January of this year, just a few months ago, the IAQG website put up an official work in progress report, WIP, on the IA9100 standard. And they say specifically that this was a result of a 5-year review. And the 5-year review indicated that the standard was due for an overhaul. And they're doing that. And they said specifically that they're going to add requirements related to ethics, product safety, data management and protection, cybersecurity, tying all of this to the new aerospace APQP standard, and technology adoption, which I'm not sure what that means. This is the official word now, all right? No deadline there indicated, and this was dated in January 2023, so only a few months ago. But this is their WIP project. Then what happened? On the bottom of that notice is some fine print, which I think is interesting, and it gives some related info and a rationale. But one of the things you want to notice is that they're making sure that as part of this, that there's no copyright restrictions exist. This hints to me, suggests, but it's just a suggestion, that maybe this is the time that AS9100 will decouple from ISO 9001, which hasn't made a lot of sense for why they're coupled to begin with. But every time that AS9100 uses the text of ISO 9001, there's copyright fees that have to be paid, and there's copyright negotiations that have to go on. So why do that? Why continue to tie the AS standard to the ISO standard when they can just decouple and go alone? We don't know if that's going to happen. It's still unlikely, but this sort of hints at something being part of the conversation. That copyright is something that they're concerned about with related to this new standard. Next, what we saw in March of 2023 is an obscure post about an event in Singapore from the APAQG, that's the Asian Pacific Aerospace Quality Group, where they talked about in March, they had an event, and they mentioned here on the bottom, you can see they're going to discuss the 9100 updates called IA9100. Now, this was an event already happened March 10th. But again, this was buried in some Singapore event, and nobody here saw it. Next, what we see is in April of 2023, the IAQG published its annual report for the prior year, 2022. But again, this only came out like last week. And in that report, it says it is anticipated that a new revision of AS9100 will be issued in late 2024 to late 2025 timeframe, depending upon the ISO decision to launch a revision of ISO 9001. It will be called IA9100. Now, that's both good news and bad news. Well, the good news part is that this is confirmation now. Okay, official sources saying that this is their deadline. This is the time frame they're looking at, 2024, 2025. What is not true in that statement is that they're trying to say they're basing this on the revision of ISO 9001, which I'll talk about in a moment. So I'm not quite sure why they're saying that. I have my theories, but again, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories. I want to just look at the facts. So we have confirmation from them they intend to release this new standard late 2024 to late 2025. Next, I want to talk about this other initiative that's happening at the same time called the IAQG Single SDO Initiative. That stands for Single Standards Development Organization. Now, this is something that doesn't mention IA9100 at all, but it's happening at the same time, and it's the IAQG's attempt to try to control the standards development process, to try to centralize it more, and also, from a practical sense, all the standards will now be sold through one website versus multiple websites, I believe. But there's just concerns with that. There's too many cooks, the Europeans, the Asians, and everything, all trying to do all these things. It takes too long to develop a standard. So they're going to kind of just crunch this down into what they call a single standard development organization process to speed up the process, etc. In an article that was written in February of this year in ASQ by Alan Daniels, he kind of hints at again what is going on here. Now, this article is only available behind the paywall of ASQ, so you can't get it unless you're a member. But in that article, Daniel says ISO uses a country-based system to develop its standards. Its processes and standards simply weren't suited to developing a detailed industry-specific standard. So you're getting a sense that the IAQG is officially sort of like, they've lost the romance with ISO and they're moving away. So there's a connection here between this idea of creating their IAQG SDO, Single Standards Development Organization, moving away from ISO. And then we can tie that in with the rebranding of AS9100 to IA9100, standing for International Aerospace. That's an attempt to stop the practice of having the Europeans call it EN9100 and Japanese calling it something else, etc. So all these things are coming together to coalesce, and it certainly looks, again, more like IAQG is really starting to move away from ISO. Whether that means that the ISO 9001 text will disappear, nobody knows. We do not know that. There's just some hinting here that there's just something going on, a little bit of a divorce happening between the IAQG and ISO, but we really can't be sure. So let's look at what facts we do know. The facts are this. The IAQG it will consolidate all the sales of AS9100 standards or AS standards under the SAE website. They're going to update AS9100 in what they say is the 2024 to 2025 timeframe and add new language related to at least ethics, product safety, data management, cybersecurity, APQP linkages, and technology adoption. Right? That new standard is going to be called IA9100. And then they're likewise going to update AS9110, 9120, and release those as IA9110 and IA9120. If you have a current system to any of those standards, you're going to have to update them, okay? But let's not panic because it doesn't have to happen now, okay? What we're guessing from this information, these are the guesses, right? This 2024 publication date is not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I've already gotten an email just 5 minutes before I did this presentation saying that no, that's unlikely to hit. They're just not going to hit it 2024. So you're looking at probably 2025 to see IA9100, unless they just, I don't know, part the Red Sea or something. So 2025 is probably more realistic. Again, a guess on my part. I'm thinking that they'll work with the IAF to implement the usual normal 3-year transition period. So once they publish a standard, you'll have 3 years to implement the new standard, which would put you around a requirement of 2028 or so to your drop dead time to implement this new IA9100 standard. Now, here's what's not facts, okay? And I'm going to completely contradict the IAQG here. It's not being driven by the updates to ISO 9001. That's just, I don't know, it's just false. It's just not true. Because what they're saying is They want us to believe that they're going to update the IA9100 standard next year, which is supposed to happen a year after ISO updates ISO 9001, which means that in their fantasy world, they think ISO is going to update ISO 9001 like literally right now. And all ISO has right now is a design spec and what they call I call a secret draft of the update. They are years away from publishing an update to ISO 9001. Even though, as I've reported on my website, the world told them don't update it at all. ISO's violating that principle of consensus, and they're pushing ahead. But even at full steam, they're probably looking at not getting that standard out until 2025, maybe 2026, right? Which means that AS9100 wouldn't be updated until a year later. The IAQG wants you to believe that somehow ISO is updating their standard this year, and then they're going to update AS9100 next year. So that's not true. These two standards are not based on each other, the timeline. The IAQG looks like they intend on updating AS9100 to IA9100 before ISO updates. Now, if it includes the language, they're going to have to update it again when ISO 9001 comes out, updated. So that's going to be a lot of updates, unless the information published by IAQG related to the timeline of 2024 to 2025 is completely BS too. But as I showed you, it was the facts. I mean, they publish this on their official website. So not clear, but it's not being driven by the updates to 9001. Nobody has any actual language of the standard draft yet. There's nothing you can find on it. It doesn't exist, okay? If they have it, it's deep in a committee. Some people are probably playing around with some words. No one's got a draft yet. My gut tells me that they probably have a draft written, but it's not published. So don't expect that you're going to find it. Don't ask. It doesn't exist. Nobody's going to be certifying to this. Now, I know over in India, Middle East, they are going to start to be issuing IA9100 certificates probably as soon as they see this video. Okay? If you see them, you know they're fake. Okay? There's no certification to IA9100. Please. It just doesn't exist. We also don't know at all if this is going to impact on the IAF accreditation scheme. Does this mean, for example, that IAQG is going to divorce itself and become its own accreditation body or its own accreditation oversight? Will it split from the IAF? Any of that? None of that. We don't know any of that stuff. I've just heard people talking about it, and it's just rumor mongering. We have no idea. My gut tells me they're just going to leave it alone. The normal people are going to be the accreditation bodies, ANAB, UCAS, all that stuff. And the IAF will just, update its procedures accordingly. So those are not facts. So that's where we're at. That's what we know and what we don't know. AS9100 will be updated. It's going to be called IA9100. We're not clear on the timelines yet. We're not clear on the rationale. We do know we have some insight into what the new requirements will be, and expect that your company is going to have to, unfortunately, update your system to comply with that, and not a lot of work around there. So that's it. What I hope you'll do is please subscribe to the Oxbridge website so you can get up-to-date, up-to-the-minute news on this as it breaks. Also, follow me on LinkedIn. So you definitely want to pay attention to this, but just remember, again, don't be frightened by any of this, but it is big news that you'll want to follow. Thanks.